Okay, so if you haven't watched my previous video setting up all the database and that, you can go and watch it. It's the previous video in the playlist where we just set up this users table in a database. Now what we're going to do is in our htdocs folder, I've created a My SQL YouTube folder, and in here I'm just going to go and create a new PHP document, and I'll call this RegisterUser.php. Then I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code. Each PHP document starts with these PHP tags to let them know that this is where the PHP document starts, similar to HTML. And in here we're going to create a few variables, and these are going to be the variables that we need to connect to our database through the PHP script. So our server name is going to be localhost, because it's on my local machine. If it was somewhere remote, you'd use the IP address, but we don't need to do that. Then the database username and database password, these you can find by opening up the start page from MAMP, and you can see here user password is root and root, so I'm just going to keep those as is. And then DB name is the database name that you are going to query. So for us, it is My SQL YouTube. Now we're going to actually create the connection to the database, and you can do that by creating a new variable called con, or just connection, and we'll set that equal to a new MySQLi object with server name, then database username, then database password, then database name as the parameters. And what this is going to do is it's going to instantiate a new object and actually try and make a connection to your database. So now we need to check if there was any kind of connection issues, and we do that by checking if connection arrow connect error. So if that's true, that means that there was a connection error, so we'll just die with the value of 1. And die is similar to just a return statement. If I go to one of my other PHP scripts, localhost /add user.php, you can see it returns 0. So the other PHP script is just dying with the value of 0. So it just returns a value, and it stops executing the rest of the script. So this is going to be a error code. Next, we need to create the actual SQL query that's going to run in our database. So over here we'll make a new variable, a string variable, that just says insert into users, because we wanted to insert into our users table over here. And then the values is going to be the values of each column in that order. So it'll be email, then username, then password. So we haven't created these variables yet, but we'll do that in a moment. So in SQL, a string is represented by a single quotation mark. So we add a single quotation mark, then we concatenate the user email. And the way string concatenation works in PHP is by using full stops instead of pluses. So we add the user email, and then we add another single quotation mark as a string. Then we open quotations, add the user password, and you can basically copy and paste this for all three. And then username. Username's in the wrong spot, so it should be user password, and here it should be username. Okay, now we're going to go and create or get the values of each of these variables. And the way we do that is we are going to send the email, username, and password from our Unity game to our PHP script through a post HTTP request. So the way we would get that is by using the $_post method. So we are now creating a variable called user email, and we'll get this from the post parameters that will be passed from Unity, and the value of the key we are looking for is email. And then user password, we'll do the same with post and get the password that's given to us from Unity, but we'll use this MD5 function, which is just going to MD5 hash the user's password that we receive. So that's the encryption that I was talking about earlier in the database. Then the username, we'll do the same, get the username from the post method. you can test your SQL queries to see if you have got any bugs in them. So you can just copy it, go to SQL, and we'll paste it here. And then instead of using the variables, we'll just type the actual text that we want. And then you press go. One row inserted successfully. So if we go browse users, you can now see that this stuff has been inserted, but the information is incorrect. So now, once we've got the actual string and we've made sure that there aren't any bugs in it by copying and pasting it to the SQL tab in our database, we can now actually go and execute that query into the database. The way we do that is we will need to use a try catch statement. So we're going to have a try statement, and within the try statement we're going to create a new object that contains the result of our query. And the way we query the database is by saying connection arrow query and our register user query as a parameter. And then this variable is just going to hold the result of the query from the database. Okay, so now we do an if statement to check if the result is false. And if it is false, that means that the query failed to run. And it could be because of a primary key violation. So for example, if a user tries to register with their same email twice, it's going to give this error message. And then if we return 30, it will mean there's some kind of query failure as well. So if the program reaches this point, that means that everything was successful. So we can echo success. This is the same as die because it returns this value back to your game, but it doesn't stop the execution of the rest of the script. And then here we can just say connection close. I remember this. There we go. And that would be everything to do with our register user function. So just to recap, we've got the server name, database username, database password, and database name. This isn't a very secure way of storing the credentials because obviously this file is hosted on a network, so people could get access to the file and just read your information. So if you're looking for a more secure way of doing this, you should look into environmental variables in PHP, or just save the data to a file somewhere locally on the computer and read that data from the file. So we've got our login credentials, then we actually make the connection to the database. Then we're checking if there is a connection error, and if there is, we return a value of 1 and cancel the rest of the execution of the script. Then we get the user email from the parameters passed to us from the Unity game. Then we get the password from the Unity game and we MD5 hash it. Then we get the username from the Unity game. And we use all three of these variables inside of our register user query. So we're telling SQL to insert all these values into our users table. Then we get a result from executing the query. And if the result is false, that means that the query failed, and it could be, for example, a primary key may have been violated. So that returns an error of 22, and if there's an exception, it returns an error code of 30. And if there's no exceptions or errors, then we return success and we close the connection to the database. So now we can actually test the script in our browser because it's actually hosted on our machine. So if I go here, My SQL YouTube /RegisterUser.php, and I press enter, you can see it says success. So obviously it shouldn't actually be successful because we didn't provide it with any email, password, or username, but it doesn't check for any null checks or that kind of thing. So if we go to our database and just refresh users, you can see there's no email, there's no username. But the password is at least hashed, which this is the MD5 hash representation of an empty string. So at least we know now the SQL works and the PHP is connecting to our database successfully. Before I delete this, I'm going to show you, if I rerun the script, you can see that there is an error of 30. So that that would also be because the primary key has been violated. So in the next video, we're going to start programming in Unity, and we'll actually set up the register functions, which will register a user with their email, username, and password and save it into the database. And then after that, we'll work with the login functions.